The story began with Hanny, a senior high school student in her final year. She had only few days left before taking the entrance exam, but the problem was that she was weak in math. She would always fall asleep during math class, which greatly angered her teacher one day. The teacher called her to answer a question on the board, but she had no answer as the result. The teacher scolded her in front of everyone. And when she went home, she ignored her studies and spent her time playing with her cell phone and listening to music. Her mother watched her and was annoyed, saying that if she could only solve math problems as easily as she memorized song lyrics, she would be a genius. Henny joked that she got her math struggles from her father, who wasn't good at it either, and that no university would accept her because of it. Henny's mother changed the TV channel to a historical drama she was watching, which made Henny even more annoyed. She left the room and went to her best friend's place. While eating, her friend reminded her that this was her last chance to get into college, and if she failed, she wouldn't have a good future. The next day, Henny woke up late and rushed out, worried she would be late for the exam. Her mother encouraged her to do her best to get into a good school. Henny was nervous about math, so she tried to study until she got on the bus. When she was about to get off the bus, suddenly rained, but she left her umbrella on the bus. As she approached the school, she was wet and nervous. Fear took over and she began to panic, thinking about running away instead of facing the possibility of failing the exam. She sat down, felt sad, and quietly prayed that she would just disappear. There was a shallow puddle in front of her, and as she approached it, something strange happened. She saw a group of people in strange clothes gathering and praying for rain, as it hadn't rained in 3 years and people were dying from drought. Suddenly, Henny found herself falling into the water. But instead of dying, she reappeared in the same place, but in a different time. She was confused and began asking the people around her if they were filming a historical drama or something. The king, who saw her strange behavior, was terrified and asked if she was a demon. Henny replied that she was just a high school student, but her way of speaking was like a magic spell, which scared them even more. The guards surrounded Henny and pointed their swords at her neck. When she realized it was real, she panicked and said she knew why she was there, and suddenly begged God to send rain. The people repeated her words like a prayer, but when they looked up, Henny was gone. Henny ran until she reached a place filled with ceremonial clothes, and she disguised herself as the official and entered a gathering with the king. At the meeting, the king said they needed to stop relying on superstitions and instead study science and math to solve their kingdom's problems. However, the chief official objected, saying it was dangerous and foolish as math was just another superstition and nature couldn't be understood. He claimed the true reason for the drought was the sky's anger with the king, and the only way to make it rain was to perform a sacred ritual with the queen. Henny secretly left the meeting and searched for her cell phone, but she was caught. While waiting for the king, she began to think she might escape once it rained. But she was shocked when the king suddenly spoke, saying it hadn't rained in 3 years. The king didn't like her and said he would have her executed immediately. Henny panicked and begged, saying she was just a student from the future and had accidentally ended up in the king's place. Henny tried to convince the king that she knew a lot about history. And when that didn't work, she said she was good at math. The king stopped holding his sword and told her to prove it, giving her an exam. At first, Henny was confused, but she eventually read the questions carefully and answered them well. The king was impressed and said his scholars took 3 days to solve it. From that moment on, everyone began treating Henny as a female scholar. The king gave her a mission to teach math to the people, and if she succeeded, he would let her return home. The king was her first student, and Henny was shocked that he couldn't count. She patiently taught him basic arithmetic, from addition, subtraction, multiplication to division. The king was paying attention to Henny without making any noise. They eventually prepared for a math competition against a musician, and if Henny lost, she would be punished. She bravely challenged the king and hurt him when she won. The guards stood up and pointed the sword at her, but the king stopped them. Laughing, they hid the math papers whenever the queen visited and pretended to owe practice music. One day, the king noticed Hanny was hungry. So he invited her to eat, but she didn't like the food, so he took her to the kitchen. She remembered she had cup noodles in her bag. She took it out and cooked it. The king loved it. Even though it was spicy, Hanny offered the king water, but he refused, saying he wanted the warmth. The next morning, the palace echoed with the king's scream. And when Hanny checked, she saw he had put a protective charm on his forehead, thinking he was cursed. Hanny said it was just noodles and not magic, and it was just chili that hurt his stomach. She explained what stomach, intestines, and heart. The king said he felt nothing. Smiling, Hanny said that one day, when he's with someone he loves, he'll feel it on his own. The king was amazed by how much she knew. He saw her as a wise scholar and asked her to teach all the noble scholars. Not just math, but also science and agriculture. That day, the king offered Hanny a tangerine. And she thanked him, but the king got angry, saying she was a Joseon wanderer and should have saved the fruit for 3 days, and that she didn't appreciate blessings. Hanny laughed and said it was just a tangerine, and he shouldn't be so dramatic. After eating, they went out to play ball, and she made the king run for the first time in years. The next day, an official talked to the king's lover, saying he would give her a magical bowl with love potion. And after that, they would get married. But fate had other plans, and the bowl ended up in Hanny's hands. And she began to act strangely and ended up sleeping in the palace. When she woke up, the king repeatedly apologized. But she said it was okay and to forget it. They walked outside, and the king said that if Hanny completed her mission, she would get a high rank in the council and a noble horse. But Hanny said she didn't want anything and would only return when it rained. The king replied that from now on, she shouldn't look at him as a king, but as an equal man to man. But the next day, disaster struck, and Hanny was arrested and accused of plotting against the king. They tied her up to torture her. But the king intervened and explained to the officials that she was a valuable scholar. However, one official took the opportunity to say he would test her himself, giving Hanny 2 weeks. And if it didn't rain, they would kill her. Hanny didn't give up and continued to study and calculate everything, helped by the palace musician build a rainfall gauge. Without warning, it suddenly rained, and Hanny was filled with joy. The king suddenly remembered Hanny's words that she would leave when it rained. So he rushed to the house where she was staying and saw her crying in front of the gauge, filled with emotion. The king told Hanny to escape, and a ship to Ming was waiting for her. Hanny said that she spent her entire life running away, and she ended up in that place because she was trying to escape her own world. In that moment, the palace musician arrived. He was secretly working with the chief official and was ordered to kill the scholar because the official believed Hanny had come from the future. The musician told the official that if it were true, then Hanny was even more dangerous and needed to be killed. The musician took Hanny on horseback and rode through the woods until they reached the forest. The musician told Hanny that he knew she was a woman and her secret was safe with him. Hanny explained that she didn't do it on purpose because the job she got was for a man and she had no choice but to accept it. In the palace, the official convinced the king that everything Hanny taught should be destroyed, especially the word love. The official also said they needed to stick to tradition and eliminate the scholar's influence, but the king couldn't accept that. The king left on horseback to look for Hanny. Meanwhile, the guards found Hanny and the musician. He put Hanny on the horse and ran to escape while he stayed behind to fight. Suddenly, the queen appeared with blood on her feet, running to that place and desperately searching for them. Hanny kept going until she reached a crossroad and she didn't know where to go. Then she remembered something the king had said, that the sun was their clock. Hanny followed the sun's rays until she reached the sea, where the king was already waiting for her. Night fell, and they sat down and watched the stars. Hanny said that in the future, they couldn't see the stars like that, only the brightest ones. The king replied that the only stars he could see now were the ones he chose to see. And when he looked at them closely, he would start to see even more. And those stars were always there, they just didn't appear until he decided to see them. After a while, the king confessed that he loved her and said he wanted to create a simpler language, so ordinary people could learn, not just the nobles. Suddenly, Hanny remembered something, took out her money and saw the king's face on it. Only then, she realized that the king would truly succeed. When the king returned to the palace, he announced that he would pay people to serve the public. Surprisingly, the chief official agreed, saying that whoever helped the people should be rewarded. The king asked what they thought of Hanny, but no one agreed, and they believed the scholar should disappear or be killed. Nevertheless, Hanny continued secretly teaching the king what she knew, including mathematics and writing, without the officials finding out. One day, while walking, Hanny saw the queen hiding and eating in secret because they forbade her from eating too much so she wouldn't gain weight and ruin her appearance. Hanny offered her some of her noodles. The queen accepted, and they started talking. From that time on, they became friends. A few days later, the queen approached the king and said she knew everything, and had already told the queen mother that Hanny was one of her ladies. Suddenly, Hanny found herself being prepared for something she didn't understand, and the palace attendants dressed her up, not knowing what was happening. Eventually, Hanny realized they were preparing her to sleep with the king, and the moment she understood what was happening, she panicked and ran from the angry people around her. One of the attendants told the king that Hanny had escaped. The king went out to look for Hanny, and when he found her, he took her to a room. Hanny shouted and protested, saying they were only friends and that she was only 19 years old. The king laughed and said she wasn't a child anymore, and he had known for a long time that she was a woman. But that night, Hanny had to stay in that place. The next day, Hanny talked to the musician and he asked her if she really wanted to go back to the future. But Hanny didn't answer and her heart seemed to hesitate. Hanny just left and sat down alone. After a while, the beloved queen came and said someone wanted to talk to and see her. When Hanny entered the palace, she saw the queen mother who looked exactly like her mother. She suddenly cried and no one understood why she was crying. That same night she went to the king to see the palace's new astronomical system, which she had helped build. The king said it would help the kingdom track the sun and moon. Then the king invited her to see other things he was working on. The king created a new set of 28 letters meant to make reading and writing easier so everyone in the kingdom could learn. While they were walking through the grand hall, the king asked Hanny to sit on the ceremonial seat, then placed the royal hairpin on her head, symbol of marriage, and asked her to stay forever. Hanny started crying and told the king she couldn't do it because she had promised to return to the future when it rained and her mother was already waiting. The king said she could meet her mother and then come back, and that he wanted them to live together, but Hanny refused again. The king lost patience and said she was right, that the future was better. Then the king left, deeply hurt. Hanny remained standing in the hall when she was suddenly hit on the head and lost consciousness. Then she felt something stab her back and the whole building was set on fire. When the king heard what happened, he risked his life and ran into the flames to save Hanny. The next day he summoned his assistant and said that the text was missing and accused the chief official of stealing it. The king grabbed the official's hand and said, "Did no one teach you to erase all evidence after committing a crime?" Then the king looked at Hanny and asked if that was the voice he heard. And Hanny replied yes. What happened was that the book in her bag saved her from the stabbing. In his extreme anger, the king confronted the chief official. The official said that if the new language spread, young people would think freely. It would create chaos and it would destroy the kingdom. The chief official also said he wasn't afraid to die, he was only afraid of the chaos that would ruin the future. The king replied that even if the official tried to stop him, he would still create a writing system for the people, and that he was the one who would fulfill the people's dream. The king also asked why he should fear a future they hadn't seen yet, and a world they knew nothing about. But the chief official didn't waver and begged him to just end his life instead. After a while, the sky darkened. Henny went to the palace and said goodbye to her friends for the last time before leaving for good. The king asked if she could let him walk with her to the farthest part, and they walked until they reached the river bank. There, Henny walked into the same puddles where she had fallen before and let herself sink again. A moment later, Henny reappeared and returned to her own world. She realized only a few seconds had passed and she still had time to make it to her exam. She ran as fast as she could to the test and saw her teacher waiting. The exam had just started, and she took the test. That day, Henny went back home and saw her mother waiting for her. Henny came up to her mother and hugged her tightly. And for Henny, everything seemed to change. She learned to value the people and things around her. Months passed while she was walking to school. It suddenly started raining and someone put an umbrella over her head. She saw a familiar face and he spoke to her. They had met a long time ago on the bus when Henny dropped her umbrella. Henny was stunned. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. He looked at her happily.